Morning, everybody. How are we doing? This is Jeremiah, and we are rolling with another webinar. I hope you're ready. I have a couple of quick little housekeeping items to get us going. I just want to remind y'all that this is being recorded, so it'll be on the website later today in case you need to revisit it. But also, this is going to raise a lot of questions, I hope. So I want to remind you of the little Q&A thing there, the little button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and click that now, I would recommend, because you can get it situated on your screen. Note that you'll be able to see the answers that I type to other people's questions. So it makes a fun little companion to the webinar. This is live. We're here. We really do want your interaction, your questions. So please don't just be a silent participant. Please feel free to chime in with questions. That's quite all right. But yeah, we are going to get going to this fun little workflow of using images. For the it's definitely a newer thing with CAD. Um, I mean, because CAD is very pure about drawing lines, and in the grandest scheme of things, there should be a CAD plan for every lot, that you could just download from the county. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And I think we will get to that point. But there is a definite need for the ability to bring in an image. This is like I said, a much newer capability of CAD, and even the vector import of PDF is barely 3 years old, I think. I mean, that's crazy compared to how long people have been asking to be able to import a PDF into CAD. So it's definitely a necessary part of a workflow, and then that's what we're going to be showing. So hey, Jake, let's take this away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jer. So I will start by saying, while we're going to be showing and sharing a lot of different image options and stuff like that, we would love to hear from you guys, your workflows that you found useful. I find it very interesting to see, the way people work and stuff like that. So I've done a lot of research and a lot of different testings on different things. So keep in mind that as I'm showing you all kinds of different ways, there's a lot of ways of doing things. Some may be better than others. Some might not fit your particular office's workflow. So keep that in mind as we go through here. But I try to account for a myriad of different options here as we go through. So that is me. I'm sure you have all heard my voice and or have spoken with me before, so we won't hang up on that too much. We have a lot of stuff to get through. A few of these slides that we are going to cover, we're not going to get into too much other than being able to pause, allow you to pause the video if you're watching this recorded, so that you can kind of take note of some steps or some different settings and stuff like that. I want to try to show how to properly insert a couple different image types, or basically based on different scenarios, when to use scale versus align, and then just touch bases on just other tools we have concerning bringing in layers, maybe some drafting techniques, and kind of setting up those sheets to use those. So we're going to just jump right into it. Now, picking an image, what we need to kind of think about when that is concerning CAD. These are all different forms of image types that CAD does accept. Now, I pulled this from their website, and so you'll see that there's quite a few other file types and image types. We are specifically going to be focusing on some of the more simple ones. I didn't highlight TIFF, but it's basically the same concept across the board for these. Now, you're going to notice also, well, where's PDF in this? PDF is actually not an image type. It is a file format that is accepted through CAD. And so I am tagging this on to the image webinar, because that is such a common practice to use a PDF as your base image. It's just technically in a different section for that. So even if you were to browse Autodesk website and find supported image types, you will not see PDF because it is a supported file type and can be used that way. But we use that basically in the same light as an image in this circumstance here. So as we get into choosing images, I just wanted to kind of touch bases on a couple things to consider. And when we get into picking that source image, maybe you're given a PDF, which is not falling into this category, but if you're going to be grabbing an image, whether it's from Google Earth or Bing, the source matters. Maybe it's even an image from a drone. And so this is just two. The one on the left is a Bing image, and the one on the right is a Google Earth image. So even the same site has the potential to have different qualities. And that really makes an impact, not only from how old the picture is, but how clear it is. Because at the end of the day, and again, depending on your workflow, the end of the day, what we're going to try to be able to use these images for is to create line work. And it could just be the simple key elements that we try to trace so that we have our boundaries. We don't need to go over every swinging line in the image to try to make it a CAD file. But at the end of the day, if you have line work, it is much easier to draft with and manipulate. So here's just another example of the same site, two different sources. Trying to find the best starting point for you is going to be super, super important. Now, you may or may not have heard of these words before, raster versus vector, but just as this little example is going to illustrate, if we were to zoom really, really close into any part of that image, whether it's a PDF, a TIFF, a JPEG, a PNG, that image is created in some fashion from something, whether it's a picture being taken. Those are generally rasters, which means that the image itself is based on pixels. It's a set number of pixels, and you lose quality the bigger you scale it. And so the finer the pixels or the more pixel it is, the larger the picture is going to be. Versely, a vector image is basically something that gets generated by a vector-based program. AutoCAD is one of those, Illustrator, Photoshop. These can generate line work that is basically geometry that is and objects that is mathematically equationed out to never lose its clarity. So it's great for creating logos and all that kind of stuff, but you are able to scale it up as big as you want and not lose that that quality. So there's trade-offs in those. But just so you understand, if you're bringing in an image and you see that it's got some pixelation, you automatically know that it is a raster-based image, versus if you were to be given a CAD plan or something like that, a PDF of a design, and you can zoom really, really close and it's really nice, crisp line work, there's a good possibility that you can use that as actual line work in CAD. So that's the difference. Now, another thing to consider is almost that input. So what your DWG size is to, as I create the file and I save that file as a PDF or export that out of CAD, what that resulting output file size is. And here's just one example I kind of mocked up and put together, and I tested it a few different ways, but this is my original source image. I put it just on a simple 8.5 by 11. There's no line work in it. It's literally just the image. But I took and I made different versions of that DWG as different file types. And you can see the resulting file size based on how I actually manipulated or used that image. This is that exact layout. Every one of these has the exact layout, but you can see their resulting PDF size, it also differs. And again, what was really interesting is seeing the smallest size of DWG was the PDF inserted, but it was one of the larger sized exported output file size. So if you go through here and kind of compare this, you can start seeing what the system is kind of doing with that image as it sits in CAD, how you work with it, and then when it gets exported, what your kind of outputted result is going to be. And so I will tell you, and we'll kind of touch bases as we go through this example live, but the OLE image file type is basically a JPEG that is not referenced into CAD. It is inserted and it is embedded into CAD. And that one absolutely was the worst case scenario as this is concerned. So I'll show you kind of a place that it might fit into a workflow. So this is not a results may vary, this is a results will vary, and it depends solely on the image type, the size of the image, and all kinds of other factors that we won't really get into, but just understand that you're going to have different results, even from this, possibly based on your starting point. So this is one of the slides that we're going to, pause on, but not really touch on much. So just know that we do have a few different path types to consider as we insert an image or a PDF. Just know our suggested method of path type would be relative. This is the most flexible. It allows everything to be pathed and keep that structure within a folder structure. But it allows you to take that entire folder structure and move it without completely breaking all of the paths, just because it's going to adopt that that hard drive or network path. It's kind of leaving that part blank, but it's pathing everything else. So as soon as you move it to another location, it finds that and it holds on to that data. The full and the no path definitely have their places. So again, thinking about what your office setup is going to be like, understand what your end goals are trying to be. If you're, going to be completely fixed on where those locations are and nothing's going to move and no sharing is going to be there, some of these other options might be worth trying out. So play around with it. Another one to pause on is, and just reference here, are some of these system variables. And these really just come down to, as I work with and within CAD, these different PDFs or images, and I'm clipping the image and I'm working with it and I'm plotting this, how I treat those frames of that specific XREF. And the settings down in the bulleted list below is kind of the values that are allowed for those different system variables. The thing to note is that if you just simply type frame is kind of the overarching master settings for any of these guys here. So if frame is set to value number 3, that means that you have different settings for any of these other system variables. So to quickly blanket uniform the way that you want it to be, set that frame to 0, 1, or 2, and every other one of those commands will jump to that, and you're going to be consistent throughout. So now I wanted to list these here just so that we had these kind of spelled out and we understood the practice and what we're going to show live, just so we don't miss anything. But we're going to be going through this quite a few different times here in the next little bit. So we have 2 different ways that we can really scale an image. To good ways to get to the size that we want, let's say that. And this first one, and the most preferred in my mind, is the reference option. And that's when you use the scale option. So I'm going to kind of go through these steps here and kind of correlate this to a little stop frame step-by-step process here. So when you have your image inserted into CAD, you can select that image and type scale into the command line. These 1 and 2 are interchangeable, so you can type scale and then select the image, but I like to select what I'm going to scale and then scale it. It's going to then prompt you for an insertion point. So this is up to you as the user to choose where this scales from, but this is basically going to be where it is fixed and scales up according to that. I personally, especially when I'm using this reference option, I like using where I'm going to start my reference points. I do that just because at the end of the day, if there's not a hard set reason why the insertion point has to be somewhere, I'm picking kind of an arbitrary point. But sometimes you need to maybe stick with 0, 0 or something like this. But as soon as you pick that insertion point, it's going to start scaling. We want to look at the command line and see that there's going to be options there for you. Type R, and it's going to pull in that reference option. Type R, press enter, and now this is a close-up version of that little scale bar that came in my image. I know these 2 points here, or I know a distance. So it's going to ask you for a first reference point. You're going to click that first point that you know, and then you're going to click the second point. This is really, really important that you don't enter any commands before this. So I pick my insertion point, I type R for reference, press enter, I pick my first point, my second point, and then it prompts me to enter a distance. So I enter that distance, and then something happens. It'll shift, it'll do something. More than likely, you're going to have to do a zoom extents, and then that's going to allow you to then check something in the plan that you know. So check a parking stall, a sidewalk width, a building length. If your image has this scale bar in it, check the scale bar, but confirm that it is now in the proper size. It should be that easy. Second one is using the align option. This one's a little bit different, and I personally like this for when I have to insert an image and use it in addition to already existing line work. Maybe the line work's already done and I just want to underlay an image. The align command is really powerful for all kinds of other things as well, aligning objects to other objects and that kind of stuff. But specifically using it for images allows you to scale that image and position that image onto the line work itself. So same kind of applies, where I can interchange these first 2, either select the image and press align, or type align and then select the image. We're going to pick our first source point. So this source point is going to be basically on the image that, or the item that you want changed. This first destination point is going to be matching where you initially clicked on that source image, matching where you want it to align to. Then it's going to ask you for a second source point and then a second destination point. So we're basically picking first the image, then the content that you want to match, and then the second point of the image, and then the second same point on the content that you want to match. From this point, you can add additional points, but you can just right click or press enter to continue. And then you're going to say yes to scale the content. If you don't, it will align to those locations, but it will not scale the image. So making sure you say yes and enter, it's going to then underlay that image onto that line work. So a very quick way to position something as well. And we'll go through that live as we go. So With that being said, this is a good starting point to start thinking about any questions or concerns or issues that you guys are running into. But we're gonna start attaching different file stuff. Is there any questions, Jer?
Always had a couple questions about continuing ed requirements that was handled. So just a reminder, as we get into anything that, well, I guess, Jeff did ask about TIFF files.
Yep.
But yeah, just a reminder, feel free to chime in with any questions and we'll get them answered. But yeah, let's see what we can see here.
Perfect. All right. So you'll see that I've got a bunch of different tabs open here. So we're going to just move on down this list. So if your question kind of falls into one of these categories, um, just know that we'll get there eventually. But I want to start out really with understanding um, the starting point of a blank file, the importance of a blank file, the template that we're going to be using. Um, it's definitely a common practice to store maybe all of the layers and stuff that you want to use into, a blank file so you don't have to keep creating those. Totally understandable. What I would say is if you have not been using our load and save layer tools, you should absolutely be using those, okay? And I'll show you how to do that right now, is if you have existing layers in a CAD file, the system's going to pull those and the settings that they are basically hosting here into a .lay file. And that's kind of a land effects um, driven and stored and pulled from location. But I've got all the layers that I want here. Now, something to consider as we're bringing in and working with images, since we're going to be using potentially PDFs as underlays or imported PDFs or PNGs or TIFFs or JPEGs, is we should technically be considering how we put those on different layers. Because as you work with these different images, maybe you want them to act differently. And so I've made a consistent, I've got an XREF and this is an image XREF. If I need to add an XREF and a PNG or a PDF or a geo located, which we'll get into later, and have those be on a different layer, I'm going to do that. But I also want to set my transparency to something so I can actually see through it. And we'll get into that a little bit down the road here. But if I got all of my layers all set up like this, I can technically even activate, let's just activate the layer that I want to start. When I start a project, I want this layer to be active because I know the first thing that I'm going to do is bring in an image. I get that set up and I can hit this Save Layers button. That's on the FX Admin tab. And it brings you to this location. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be part of my template, and this is going to be my site layers, something like that. We're going to save it. So it's done. What my template should really look like, and I guess I should activate that guy so I can purge out those. My template should be as white as snow, just like this. And the flexibility now that I have is I can now load those layers that I've sort of saved into my templates. I can load that in, and you can see that the system loaded all that in and made this guy active. So I'm ready to go, okay? And that's just a quick down and dirty setup that we can sort of play off of. But if you guys have any questions about these guys, hover over the button, press F1, and you can get to more information on those later. So now that I got everything in, I got the layer active, I want to bring in an image. Now, we have this insert tab up in the ribbon that you can attach all of these things, but an image is also considered an XREF. Okay, so we can pull up our XREF manager and we can drop this little guy down and we can pick it from this list. And there's attach image. Attaching image allows you to do all of those image types that that we were looking at here. So we can go and we can find our site wherever it might be, and we can open that guy up. Now you're given this similar XREF dialog box here where you can insert basically wherever you want to. For our purposes, it really doesn't matter because we're going to scale this up after the fact. So here's where you'd be able to set your path, and we can just say okay. So there it is. You can see that it landed again on this layer. I had a transparency set to this layer, good enough to see still, but so that if I need to work on any layers or line work and stuff like that, and the draw order is different, I can see everything that I need to see. So it's now in here, and we're going to go ahead and go through those steps now of scaling this guy up. So I'm going to go ahead and select this guy, and I'm going to use the scale. My base point, again, if I pick my 0, 0 point, here's where he starts scaling from. If I pick another point, this is where he starts scaling from. So that's what that base point or that insertion point is going to be. But it's not going to fully matter once we start doing what we're going to do here. So I'm going to pick my base point, and now I can type R and enter. And now it's saying specify reference length. So I'm going to pick my first point, and I'm going to pick my second point. And you can see that it's grabbing it now, scaling it based on those two spots. And now I can enter what that distance is. And it did something. I'll zoom extents, and let's go ahead and just check something in the drawing here. So there's some parking lot lines. We can do a quick little thing here, and that looks just about right. So as you can imagine, something that's going to be a little bit up in the air, gray area, is doing dimensions, making sure everything is exactly right, because we don't have anything to snap to, right? We don't have the proper real clarity on the lines and stuff like that. That's blurred. It might be within some of those pixels somewhere that we're measuring. It's hard to also measure the same place twice consistently. And that's, again, why we want to kind of trace this line work and use as that initial setup of those key elements so that we can use that to go off of instead of the image. Having said that, the larger the area that we can, measure out and scale based on, the closer we're going to be to the exact dimensions or to the proper size of things. Okay, if we just simply take this drawing and do that scale and reference command and just scale a parking stall, we're off. If we're off by just a couple inches here, that really extrapolates across the site. So we might be off in a larger grand scheme number versus taking a larger distance to scale from. So just keep that in mind as you're scaling things, that as best as you can, use a large portion of the site to be able to scale. But this is now scaled, and we can technically start working on it and doing whatever we need to do. And I'm going to keep going on and just do each one of these examples, and then we're going to kind of come back and try out some tracing stuff and whatnot if we have time. So we're going to just jump over to the PDF scenario now. So we're going to come back to our XREF manager, and you'll notice that he's obviously here as an option as a PDF. But something to consider, and I'm going to kind of do both of these simultaneously, the underlay and the import, is if you're going from the XREF manager, this button here really only is an underlay option, okay? So even if I were to say attach a PDF, we find our PDF, and I pick a vector-based PDF, it's only going to give me the underlay options, okay? So no matter what kind of PDF that you're using it from the XREF Manager or using the underlay option is going to give you just the underlay choices. So we're going to just say same thing as the JPEG there. We're going to let it insert. What you're going to notice, there's going to be two differences here. And I'll bring in, I'll just do another one here. And we'll put him just off to the side. Okay, so I actually have two of the same drawing here, two PDFs. One's vector and one's raster. And just without scaling everything, I'm just going to show you what that really means as you start working with the line work. When we're doing polylines or any kind of object snapping in a raster image style, you can see that it's connecting to the borders of that image because it finds it, but it's not seeing any of this line work, right? And so we're tracing this from our best abilities from that line work. But if you come over to a vector-based program, and generally something that was generated out of CAD and it's a PDF, you'll be able to see this. You can see that it's snapping to any of this line work. Even though it's not line work here, it's just that PDF. It does make it so much easier to work with because we can use some of these things in that file to snap to and scale to appropriately. So keep that in mind, even though we're using this PDF as an underlay and not importing the actual line work, we can still use it to snap to if we can get a vector-based PDF, which is really nice. So we'll go ahead and just delete that guy. We're going to go through the same steps. I'm going to do the scale option, pick him as my insertion point, and then reference. And I'm just going to pick this point and this point because I know those 2 points are 40 feet, right? So I'm going to say 40 feet and hit enter. And then we can zoom extents. And now we can measure something. So if we did this right, if I measure this point to this point, it should be 40 feet, which it is, which is really cool. Now, I'm going to undo this because I do want to show you something. If we were going to dimension just inserting this at the 1-to-1 scale, and again, this depends on the image that you get, so it doesn't always work, but it's something to note about how your drawing is set with your units. So if we're going to dimension this point to this point, you can see it's only 2 inches. Let's go ahead and insert that base one more time. And actually it might, yeah, 2 inches, okay. So depending on the deal, and I think I was playing with another image to be honest, but depending on how you insert this, it might be in the right size, but the wrong units. And so just making sure that your units are according to what you are going to be drafting at or want to insert at. You know, I had one come in at actually 1 foot 18 inches kind of a thing, or sorry, 1 foot 8 inches. And it was basically saying, all right, this is, if I change this to decimal feet, it would have actually been the proper size dimensions. So just keep in mind your units as you're going through this stuff. So we'll go ahead and scale this guy one more time. First point, second point, 40 feet, zoom extents, and then check stuff and you can start drafting, okay? Now, let's do this PDF import guy. The PDF import has to be done with either the PDF import command or using this button right here in the Insert tab. And we'll go ahead and grab this. Now, the same applies here, but in reverse. If I were to try to import a non-vectored or a rastered image, it's only going to do what it can do, which means either not bring in anything because it doesn't have stuff, or it's going to only bring in the images if you choose to bring in what it can, right? So you have a couple different options here as you are doing this. So I'm gonna bring in the vector one so that we can kind of see what that actually does. And I'm gonna bring in the images as well. This is actually kind of a cool thing because it actually splits out, it kind of doubles up and it brings in the raster image as well as all of the available line work. So, and it keeps them separate. So then I can put my image onto an actual layer separate than all of the line work itself. There's a lot of different options in here. I would say for the most part, you're actually safe keeping it as the default settings. The one that I was playing with here is this solid fills. And this really, from like a thickness perspective, it brings in those and it makes them solid fills. Kind of messes with some of your snapping sometimes. And so I decided to just turn that guy off and see what it would do. So depending on the size of that PDF, the content that's in there, this might take a good little bit of time to evaluate and process and convert into line work. So just be aware of that. But once it comes in, it's actually now all line work. Okay. This is still an image right here. Not right there, but right here. So he's just a completely separate image from everything, which means now we can start, bringing in the layers. We don't have the proper layers that we need here, so maybe we can bring in our XREF image layers and stuff like that we do. We can manipulate this line work now. This line work is, however, exploded stuff. This is not something that I would recommend using as a part of your actual design. Again, we're using this so that we can, when the time comes, unload that image and still have the proper line work to just be able to do our design, which means that the file that we create when using PDF import should be its own file. We should not design in it. It should be the base file. It should turn into basically a DWG XREF for your base, right? So that we have full control over designing on top of it, snapping to the objects, seeing all of our areas. But we're not using this line work because this is now not a dashed line type. These are all separate entities. Trying to work with some of this geometry is just very, very messy. And it could create a lot more headaches trying to reuse what CAD was able to transcribe for some of your line work. So definitely use this as the starting point of, okay, I now have all of my geometry in here. What do I do? So let's just double check now. We just brought that in. We didn't scale. Let's check what that actually is. So we're still incorrect. So we can just select everything. Again, I did. Let's just reload that so we make sure we've got it all selected. We can do our scale. Pick my point, reference these 2 points, say 40 feet, zoom extents, and now this is good to go. I can save this as my base. I can then start my new drawing and insert this in as my base, and we can sort of get rocking and rolling. I'm going to stop here for a second, Jared. Is there any questions that we need to clarify or anything?
I think a couple of people chimed in with some great tips for Google Earth. Eric reminding that you want to make sure it's in vertical mode. You don't want a little bit of perspective when you grab the
Yeah,
image. It's always a good, yep, got to always be sure to click that button. And we also had someone chimed in and mentioned that check the historical photos. Sometimes those can be better.
it's true.
And I just know I've seen that where, the most recent photo is a little too recent. You got all the construction equipment there, and it's nicer to get the more clean site. So that's
Yeah,
some good tips there.
those are great tips. Yeah. And we'll, I might even show you one more as we get into the Google Earth one. So let's jump over to this. Now, I believe that all of these options have a time and place, even this embedded guy. The fact that I was playing around, embedded an image in here, um, and it bloated the file to 41 megs is just unacceptable. So I would not, as much as possible, embed your entire base plan image into your file. The pros of that, obviously, and why you would want to embed an image is so that you're not getting that missing XREF message as you're sharing a file and stuff like that. Um, and just to be able to show you how it works, I considered being able to put your logo into your plan as an acceptable one. It's not super big. You can make a nice low version of it, and it keeps things moderately small still. So again, play with this idea if you want to across the board. But what we're going to show here is just how to embed an image into here, and I'm going to do it based on putting in a logo. So this is something I learned new is you basically need to take your image, whatever that image is, um, and this is a fairly small file here, but you've got to open this with some type of photo editing program. It can be as easy as Paint. So as soon as you open it up in Paint or wherever you're at, what you're going to want to do is select all the content. And I'm doing just a Control A for Control All and copy that. That's all you need to do is you need to copy that content from here. And I can even close that, get back over to my CAD file, and we're just going to paste it. So you'll see that I'm just doing a paste clip. It's obviously way bigger than I need. You can also do paste special, works as well, but I'm just going to pick a point here and insert it. Now, it's going to say, all right, I'm going to try to do some stuff with some text and font stuff, but we're just going to say okay because there's literally nothing here but the image. And now what you can see is this is an OLE object. If we look into our XREF manager, there's nothing here as it being recognized as an XREF, which means I can save this. There's no path to it. I can share this DWG, and this image is going to always be here. So how do we scale it? We definitely can do what we've done before with insertion point and then reference. For this, I just want to pick this corner and this corner because I want it to fit within this area, just like that. So it's as easy as kind of bringing it in and scaling it to the size that you want it. What you should keep in mind is that if you select that OLE object, you can see that it's got a couple different settings here. There's some plot qualities and stuff like that that you can change to try to help. But there's also this way to change the width. So this is 3.5 inches big. So maybe I want it 3.25 and it'll adjust accordingly as well. So then I can move it and fit it right within that area. So with that, and it's embedded, and again, it's embedding the whole object. So depending on the type of image that you do, if you don't want it to be a white square on that, I think you're going to have to choose the format for that. Might as well clarify now too, a JPEG versus a PNG. Really the only difference is a PNG does allow for a transparent background where a JPEG does not. So it does obviously change file size a little bit, but I think inserting that PNG allows you to save that PNG with a transparent background and achieve the same thing. So once it's here and you go to plot it or whatnot, you're going to see that it's going to read in just like that. We have our setting for that OLE frame system variable to 2, which means we can see that frame, but it doesn't plot. So that's my preferred way, so that you don't have little borders on everything. So that's that fun little embedding thing. Do we have questions about more embedding stuff, or keeping it simple?
I think we're good. Jeff just asked, what is that OLE thing? And so gave him a little tech history. That's an old Windows. Boy, that goes back when that first came out. I want to say Windows 3, maybe. I mean, way far back, but they invented OLE. At the time, it was a big hoo-ha. But it just simply is a Windows standard that allows you to embed an entire other file, an external file type. Object linking and embedding is what it stands for. So rather than having that image be a separate file that is XREF'd in, the entire image file is literally embedded inside the DWG. So yes, it will make the DWG file larger, but as you were showing, of course, you don't have the separate XREF. So there's pros and cons to it. And I think it literally just depends. I think you picked a perfectly great example. Is a logo is a great example of something that you would just want to embed in there so that it'll never get detached in any way.
Yeah,
But for that, for an image background, probably best to keep that as a separate file.
most definitely. I was shocked when I had a 41 meg file without anything in it other than the image. So yeah,
Yeah, it is. It is a what is called. It is a very heavy standard. You'll
yeah,
see if you look on forums, especially way back in the day, they'd be like, "Hey, I embedded this 40K Excel file into a DWG, and it's 3 megabytes larger." It's like, well,
yeah.
why don't you call
That's what it is.
Microsoft and yell at Bill Gates? I don't know.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a great way to do little things for sure. I liked it. All right, geolocate. This is one that is something that a lot of people ask for. How do I bring in a map, a Bing map, or whatever it is? Um, we're going to go through the basics of how this tool works. Um, I actually don't mind this workflow. Um, it has its pros and cons, just like everything else. But if you just simply type geo, you can set a location from a map or a file. And so what's kind of cool is from the file option, it allows you to choose, you guessed it, something that you can export out of Google Earth. So just to show that just really quickly, if we were to come down into a little area here and say we've got a couple sites pinned or something like that, and maybe I have another site that I want to work on right here, I can drop a pin, and this was on the other screen there, but we'll just say site 2. You can basically right click on that pin guy and save place as, and this is going to save it out as a KMZ or a KML. And so you can just simply save him. You can come back over here, pick him from the list, and now it's going to ask you a few things, and obviously hide it if you don't want to keep seeing this. But basically, this online mapping stuff does access stuff via the internet and subscription stuff. So say yes so that it automatically updates. and it auto loads in that location for us. So we can just simply hit next. If you're doing this by map, it's going to just start from here, and you can search a place and right click and drop a pin or move marker just the same, but you're going to hit next. And this is going to load up some coordinate system stuff, and basically everything that I've read and tried to find out and learn and read on is pick one of these options. It's as clear as they were with things. So basically they say the higher up here, it's closer to the origin of the location, but basically picking one so that you can say next. And then it's unclear about why you would pick anything else other than 0, 0 and at the original point direction wise, because this now brought in an image. And what I really like about this is the fact that it rescales, and the resolution of this changes again based on its quality and shots of the area. But I can scroll clear out and it keeps adding the image to a certain point, which was mind boggling that it's like that. But I can now get down into the site just like that. And I can do my work. I didn't have to scale anything. If I do a dimension and I pick, 2 points here, it's automatically scaled appropriately. So what's cool about this even further is I can zoom out, I can capture an area, or I can capture my viewport, so this entire view, but I'll capture an area and we'll just say this is my working site area. And you can see it brought in a little guy here, which again, the importance of these layers that we create. I can create a geo layer, let's call it, that I can put this on and fade it differently, but I have different options for this guy here. But past that, for the rest of my map, I can turn it off. And so I only have the place that I'm working on. I can turn on that aerial, capture an area. Maybe it's another location just off to the side, and I can turn the map off. And now I've got my 2 working points here. I can resize and do stuff here, and it just does what it needs to do. I can change the map type to something else, or I can, turn the map on differently than that screen captured area. So very, very cool little ways that you can start manipulating this and doing your drawing stuff on. So scaling and aligning is not even a thing here because it's just ready to go. But again, based on the imagery that you can pull, it might not be the best quality for that. So anyways, that's geolocate, and we need to keep moving. So we're going to do some aligning now. We're going to try that align command. This is starting from the point of me just bringing in that image and it not matching anything. This image could have been completely at a different location and an angle and stuff like that, or position. It really wouldn't matter. But for clarity purposes, I'll show you how this works. So we're going to grab this guy and we're going to type align, or type align and select that guy. Now our first source point is somewhere that we want to align to. Now I'm going to sort of pick one in this respect because I know this line is something that I could definitely follow. This is one of the reasons I like a very large crosshair, so that I can align based on seeing other points while picking somewhere else. So here's my first point. I'm going to pick that same point right here. I'm going to pick my second point. So it doesn't always have to be like up and down. It can be over here. We're going to grab that guy and we're going to pick this guy. Now I can continue by right clicking or hitting enter, saying yes, scale it, and it automatically moved it and positioned it based on those points that we just did. Now, for this purpose, that image was draw ordered on top. So I do have to select him and say draw order to the back um, to do that. But you can see now that line work is, if it was drawn again properly based on that image, it's going to line up perfectly for stuff. So now I have a full range of being able to work in here on that image if I need as a reference point. But then past that, I can just go into my XREF manager, right click on that image, unload it, not detach it, unload it, and it'll turn it off temporarily so that I can just work, do what I need to do. Um, I can come back here, I can reload it, and it's back to where it is. But the reason that I enjoy, putting this onto an actual, X image layer that we can set a transparency to is so that when we do work, we don't have to necessarily turn it off to see stuff. If something falls behind it, we can see what it is just temporarily. So last one, because I did want to get to this, is the ability to tie a PSD file. This is new to me and something I really want to venture out into a little bit more. But we've done a lot of cool webinars. Paul has put together some really cool webinars on illustrative plans and different things. You might be saving this out as a PDF, and it's a large file because of all the color and the layers and stuff like that. But you can actually, and then maybe things change and you got to reload that file and stuff like that. You can actually tie a whole PSD file, a whole Photoshop file to CAD, which means that it's basically linking to anything that I do here. It's going to link it into what's happening in the XREF. So the nice thing about that is that a PSD file is just like an image. So you can attach an image, you can grab that PSD file and bring it in just like that PSD file. Now I've already got it loaded, so I'll show it to you. So here it is on his own layer, and it's there. So what's cool about this is you can actually, depending on how you've obviously set stuff up, is you can now be fully flexible on how or what you show in this drawing. So once it's XREF'd on and stuff like that, I can just reload. Oops, I do need to save the changes to that. Save the changes to your Photoshop document. Come back over here, reload, and it fixes the image. So you get this powerful cross between all the flexibility you have from the Photoshop document, but the small file size that this DWG holds, which means that I can then start doing all of my other working on top of this image. And because this would be a nice thing to be able to present on something that's illustrative type of a thing, is that you could print and have like a nice imaged document with all of your line work and additional design stuff to work off of. So it does really make it kind of a fun hybrid for that. So we're like right at the time, Jer. I know we didn't get too much into drafting, but do we have any
Oh, that's
questions?
okay. I don't think we need to. I think I mean, we covered this topic. I mean, like, I learned a lot. I did. This is great, and I think I really enjoyed all just the obvious pros and cons of all these different techniques, and you really need to be well versed in all of them, because depending on what it is, it's good to know, and the kind of work you do, the kind of deliverables you need, but this really covered it. Um, so just want to say thanks to everybody, and keep the ideas coming. This one obviously came from ideas from people. So, we need your ideas to come up with topics. So, so please keep those ideas coming. And otherwise, have a super safe and careful weekend. It is going to be raining a lot of places. I know it's going to be raining here. So be careful out there and have a good weekend.
Thanks, guys.